Hello, hello, check, 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 1, 2, 3, check, 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 hello, hello, 1, 2, 3. We are testing webcaster on YouTube. We can testing you live on YouTube through webcaster.
Talk that actually gets you. Campus Gal Radio.
Hi. So, you've got savings, and now we need to turn them into investments. How do we do that? When we consciously or mindfully take money out of our bank and put it into more productive use, like shares or bonds or real estate or anything like that, that is called investing. Ready to go? Let's get started. So, at its very basic, investing means giving money to a business for a return, of course. So, how do you do that? So, the first way of doing it is that you lend the money to the business and they promise to give the money back to you. You both agree on what interest rate you're going to charge them and at what intervals they're going to give you coupon rates or interest, and then when the principal is going to come back. That is lending, or it's also called investing in debt. The other way is that you take a silent partnership or take a stake in the business. That means that you participate in the profits and the losses at a predetermined proportion. So somebody could say that you now become 1% of the business, or you become a 2% owner of the business, or 5%, 10%, whatever the number is. The point is that you become a silent partner. Now, silent means you can't just tell the management or the person who's managing the business what to do. You have to pretty much go along with whatever they do. Also, they don't have to give you a dividend. They can choose to give you a dividend if there are profits, or they can choose to reinvest the dividends but it also includes things like agricultural commodities, so wheat and dal and coffee and sugar and things like that. Things like oil. So of commodities in the world that are usually dug out of the ground or mined or somehow taken out of the earth, and they're usually used for purposes. Obviously, of course, for industrial purposes as well, but the point is that commodities are a natural resource. The two real asset classes are called real estate or property and commodities. So we've discussed financial assets, equities and debt, and real assets being real estate. These four things, these four groups of assets are called asset classes. They're basically classifications of assets that behave very similar to each other. What does that mean? That means, for example, if you invest, say, in a bank stock, say XYZ Bank, you could invest in the equity or in the debt. On any given day, the equity price of that stock will behave more than the market is doing. Whereas the bond that you buy of that bank will behave more in line with what the bond market is doing. Now, the bond market is more influenced by things like interest rates and inflation, because they're the only variables that really matter in the pricing of a bond. On the other hand, the business, the stock price, is affected by many more factors, and that's why something far away, something happening overseas can affect the stock market. It can affect the bond market as well, but invariably the equity prices are affected by many more things. Those are called the equity risk premium. I know, technical term, we'll come to it later. The point is that they're the four asset classes, and asset classes means that they're a grouping of assets which behave similar to each other and different from the other classes. Now, asset classes are different from products. Products are basically just legal structures that wrap around the asset classes. So when we talked earlier about not wanting to pick stocks yourself and you invest through a mutual fund, notice I said invest through a mutual fund. That means that actually we are buying stocks or a portfolio of stocks, but through a mutual fund. The mutual fund is a product. It's a legal structure that's giving you exposure or access to the underlying asset class, which is equities. Of course, if the professional fund manager is doing the good job, they will, of course, charge their fees. That's fine, but the product simply gives you access to the underlying asset class. Why am I saying all this? Because sometimes people say that mutual funds are risky, or mutual funds are this or that. Mutual funds are not any of that. They are just the wrapper. They can't have risk and return of their own. Take return of the underlying asset class that they are investing in. So if someone tells you mutual funds are risky or not risky or high return, it's just they're using the term colloquially rather than technically. Now, assets can be subdivided. In technical terms, we call them segments, but again, in common usage, we might refer to asset classes as well. So for example, equities could be further subdivided into large cap, which are 100 stocks, mid cap, the next 100 to 150 stocks, and then small cap, which are the smaller companies that are still listed on the stock exchange. I would call them segments, but there are other people, like I said, them sub-asset classes or sometimes just asset classes. Frankly, what you call them doesn't matter. What you have to be conscious of is why they do that, because the risk and return starts to vary. So if you invest in stocks, whether it's a large cap, mid cap or small cap, it will be affected by the stock market movement, but maybe small caps would be riskier because the companies are smaller and not be able to weather whatever the adverse news is. So yes, it could affect the small caps more compared to mid cap, compared to large cap. Just because you further simplified the asset classes does not mean that you are more accurate in your predictions or in your diversification. Okay, so it's better to be vaguely than precisely wrong. So broadly, if you have exposure to equities and debt, and then real estate and commodities, you are reasonably diversified. If you go into sub-asset classes or segments, as I prefer to call them, you are getting some more diversification, but it starts to not have that much benefit. Another question you should ask is, why diversify? The answer is because different asset classes behave differently, because they are driven by different factors or drivers of returns. So, as I said earlier, debt is more by interest rates and inflation, whereas equities obviously relies on corporate profits. And corporate profits, in return, relies on other factors, whether the government is favorable or not, the changes happening or not, the business environment, are we in a recession, or what other part of the business.
Hello. This is testing. We are testing on YouTube through Wecaster. This is Campus Girl Radio testing on YouTube through Wecaster. Hello.
Hi. So, you've got savings, and now we need to turn them into investments. How do we do that? When we consciously, mindfully take money out of our bank and put it into more productive use, like shares or bonds or real estate or anything like that, that is called investing. Ready to go? Let's get started.
We dream big.
Let's start with personal finance. Remember, it's not
where girls talk.
Hello. Test 1, 2, 3. We are testing YouTube channel, webcaster through on. Hello. We will check in later.
आपका ऑडियो करेक्ट से है.
People think that money and finance and economics is about math, about numbers. But actually, remember, it's not a hard science, but a social science, which means it's about people. People like me who make up retail investors, people who are the professional fund managers that are institutional investors. And it's people that we give the money to, who run the businesses, whether it's the companies or governments for that matter. And we, people, we make mistakes, we have emotions, we can't do math in our head. So actually, money is about people. Be mindful of the mistakes. Hi, and we are learning to be mindful. Today we'll discuss behavioral and what about them. The human brain is fascinating. We're still learning quite a bit about how it works, which means we don't really know what we're doing. But what we do know about investing, at least, is that we have two brains, metaphorically speaking. One that thinks very fast, and one that thinks very, very slowly. So sometimes we make snap judgments and then we justify it. So it leads to errors. These errors are called behavioral biases. You might have come across this term before. You might have seen an article or a show about these behavioral biases. It's important that we understand them. And to do that, let's group them into two. There's basically cognitive errors or biases. Representative bias. There's illusion of control and there's hindsight bias. These are all belief perseverance biases. And then we have information processing biases. So these are things like anchoring, mental accounting, availability, self-attribution, outcome, and recency. And then there are emotional biases. So these are called loss aversion or ambiguity aversion. There's overconfidence, there's self-control issues, there's status quo bias, there's endowment bias, there is regret aversion, and there's affinity. Let's now dive deeper into some of these so you understand what we're talking about. Let's now read out some of these biases together. Illusion of control bias. This occurs when people believe that they can control or at least influence investment outcomes when fact is they cannot. People who believe this always tinker with their portfolios, right? They're the ones that trading ties, they accept high risk. And confirmation bias. Confirmation bias happens when people seek out information that confirms what they already believe and they discount any evidence that contradicts what they believe. You know those types. Representative bias. Representative bias occurs as a result of flawed perceptual framework when processing new information. So to make new information easier to process, some investors project outcomes that resonate with their own pre-existing bias. For example, a particular stock is seen as a value stock because it resembles an earlier value stock that was a successful investment. But the new investment is not a value stock. Availability bias. This occurs when people estimate probability we are able to recall the more recent events, forget the events from further back. Overconfidence bias. Overconfidence is another one that we probably all recognize. This is when we are much more confident than what the data suggests, because we think somehow we have special abilities. Anchoring bias. This is a good one. Anchoring bias occurs when we anchor an outcome to a particular number, adjust from there. So the simplest one is when we 100 rupees for something, and the market up and down, we will till we, of course, the know what we paid, so it don't care. But somehow in our heads we are anchored to. Example is we are asked, we are given. It actually ends up being us to a number. Bias. Sometimes we just don't make a decision, and then that decision turns out to be wrong. Rather, not continue in the status quo, and do something. In status quo, investors tell themselves that things have always been this way, it's always been done this way, and they feel when it continues to be the same way. Loss aversion bias. In loss aversion bias, investors tend to feel the pain of losses more than the pleasure of the gains. This is a very common bias and is seen by almost every advisor. Self-control bias is when we are not able to control ourselves. This happens more in spending and investing, but there are some people who can't control and trade very often. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many more errors that us humans make. We will provide a full list of these behavioral biases for you to read at your own leisure. So, how many of these errors did you recognize? Either that you do or someone around you does? Well, until now, all we ever did was list these behavioral biases names and what their definition is. We didn't do anything about it. But that is changing. The industry now believes that we can do something about them, and that's why we group them into cognitive and emotional biases. Based on their client interactions, these advisors realized that with emotional errors,
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. Check, check, check. 1, 2, 3. Check. Listening to Campus Girl Radio. We are testing Campus Girl Radio on YouTube channel for testing through webcaster. Hello, hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
and direction. That's what GLAD stands for. Jaya Srivatsa simplifies the great knowledge imparted in the Bhagavad Gita, which can help us tremendously to understand and apply it in our own lives.
Namaste and welcome to GLAD, Gita Lexicon and Direction. We are in the 6th chapter, which is called Dhyana Yoga. Krishna is talking about meditation. What is the first thing you have to do when you want to meditate? And why do you have to meditate? Meditation is the 4th M of management, which talks about managing men, materials, and money. But Krishna says there's a bigger M to manage, and that's called the mind. And how do you do that? You'll have to, location is also a very important thing in marketing. So he says, Shucho Deshe, find a clean spot. Sthiramasanam. Sit quietly. Don't fidget around. Not too high, not too low. Natyuchitam, natinicham. And then he says, sit on kusha grass, which is not a very hard surface, not a very soft surface. Too hard will make you feel uncomfortable. Too soft will make you too comfortable. Natyuchitam, natinicham. Neither too high, not too low. So you see, all this, I think they call it ergonomics in today's parlance. And that's what Krishna taught 5 years ago. So before you decide to meditate, he says, find a clean place. Sit quietly. Sthiramasana. Not too high, not too low should be the seat on which you're sitting.
Like this Sochcast? Tune in for more with the Sochcast app from the Google Play Store.
And it should be neither too soft nor too hard. Just simple basics, right? And did Krishna have to teach Arjuna all this on a battlefield? See, that's what we are all in a battlefield. And if we want to meditate, let's get this thing straight first. And once you get this and you settle down, let's see what else he tells you to be careful of. He's the teacher for us for meditation. And when you find a comfortable and not too comfortable and not over comfortable
Brains, metaphorically speaking, of course, one that thinks very fast and one that thinks very, very slowly. So sometimes we make snap judgments and then we justify it. So it leads to errors. Now these errors are called behavioral biases. You might have come across this term before. You might have seen an article or a show about these behavioral biases. But it's important that we understand them. And to do that, let's group them into two. There's basically cognitive errors or biases. These are based on the way our memory works or the way we think. Within that, by the way, two different ones. There's belief perseverance biases, and then there's information processing. The belief perseverance biases are similar to, how we think that sugar causes our kids to go hyper. Well, it's now been proven that that's not the case. But in spite of this evidence, there are some people who believe that it does happen. Similarly, in investing, sometimes we are shown the evidence and yet we refuse to believe it. So these biases have names like they have cognitive dissonance, there's conservatism, there's confirmation bias, there's representative bias, there's illusion of control, and there's hindsight bias. So these are all belief perseverance biases. And then we have information processing biases. So these are like anchoring, mental accounting, availability, self-attribution, outcome, and recency. And then there are emotional biases. So these are called loss aversion or ambiguity aversion. There's overconfidence, there's self-control issues, there's status quo bias, there's endowment bias, there is regret aversion, and there's affinity. Let's now dive deeper into some of these so you understand what we're talking about. Let's now read out some of these biases together. Illusion of control bias. This occurs when people believe that they can control or at least influence investment outcomes when fact is they cannot. People who believe this always tinker with their portfolios, right? They're the ones that trading ties, they accept high risk. And confirmation bias. Confirmation bias happens when people seek out information that confirms what they already believe and they discount any evidence that contradicts what they believe. You know those types. Representative bias. Representative bias occurs as a result of flawed perceptual framework when processing new information. So to make new information easier to process, some investors project outcomes that resonate with their own pre-existing bias. For example, a particular stock is seen as a value stock because it resembles an earlier value stock that was a successful investment. But the new investment is not a value stock. Availability bias. This occurs when people estimate the probability of an outcome on the basis of how prevalent that outcome has been to their lives. So these
life to real life. Campus Gal
So
Radio.
personal finance is managing, protecting, and growing your money. Now, what is financial planning? Basically, planning your personal finance is called financial planning. Simple, right? But not easy. See, it's like health. Just like we know that we need to eat well and exercise more, but we don't do it. We need motivation, we need guidance, and sometimes when we get it wrong, we need correction. So, a yoga instructor and a professional, and then maybe a doctor as well. Similarly, in finance, while we may know that we need to save more and invest more, we don't actually do it. So, we need the help of financial planners or financial advisors to help us with motivation, with guidance, and also correcting any mistakes we make. So, in this episode, we will talk about what is involved in financial planning, the different types of financial planners, and also what a good financial plan looks like. Hi, I'm Hansi, and in this series, we're learning to be money mindful. Let's get started. So let's start with the logistics of financial planning. We need to do our homework before we see anyone. We need to make a list of all our assets and liabilities. We need to make a list of our family members and any other dependents that we have to provide for. Then we have to make a list of our goals, because that's what a financial advisor will need to know. All of this is collated in one place, and if you don't have all the paperwork with you, they can actually
Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Check, check, check. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Check. Hello, hello. We are testing Campus Girl Radio. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Check. Hello, hello, hello.
ಕಾಲ್. ಹಲೋ, ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್ ಟು ಕ್ಯಾಂಪಸ್ ಗಾಲ್. ರೇಡಿಯೋ ಜಾಕಿ ಆಗಬೇಕೆ? ಹಾಗಾದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗೆ ಬನ್ನಿ. ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ತರಬೇತಿಗಾಗಿ ಸಂಪರ್ಕಿಸಿ. ಪರಿಣಿತರಿಂದ ತರಬೇತಿಯನ್ನು ಪಡೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳಿ.
Work with your other providers like a chartered accountant or a lawyer and so on. But ideally, you should collate all that in one place. With that, you go to a financial advisor or planner, or you fill it in online, and then they start sort of collating it. They may give you a other providers like chartered accountant or a lawyer and so on.
भाई देखो, इधर से आने का डिस्कनेक्ट किया. हमी ऐसी है इधर पे यार ना 30 सेकंड होती है इधर नहीं. देखो, इधर से आने का डिस्कनेक्ट किया. हमी ऐसी है इधर पे यार ना 30 सेकंड होती है इधर.
ಆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೀಮಿಂಗ್ 30 ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಸ್ಲೋ ಇರುತ್ತಲ್ಲ.
किधर है भाई? नहीं आ रहा.
ये ऑडियो कहाँ से ले रहा है? ये ऑडियो माइक तो ऑफ है. उसका उसका माइक तो ऑन नहीं है इसका.
हाँ, ये डिस्कनेक्ट किया तो
इसका माइक ऑफ करो.
इसका माइक ऑन है.
ऑफ करो उसको.
ऐसा ऑफ नहीं होता. ये कनेक्ट किया तो वही ऑटोमेटिक ऑफ होती है.
कहाँ से ले रहा है? ये ऑडियो माइक तो ऑफ है. उसका माइक तो ऑन नहीं है इसका.
हाँ, ये डिस्कनेक्ट किया तो
इसका माइक ऑफ करो.
इसका माइक ऑन है. देखो, अभी हमिंग नहीं है. इसका ऑडियो आ रही है.